In the last episode of this mini-series, we talked about the earliest origins of the Vandals and their route to Spain. This episode will focus on their kingdom in North Africa. How did the Vandal Kingdom in Carthage begin, and how did it become so powerful? Welcome to our second video on the Vandals, their king Geiseric, and the sack of Rome. The sponsor of this video, NordVPN, probably can't save your city from the Goths, but it can save your data and passwords from prying eyes and allow you to surf the web freely, which makes NordVPN indispensable for the modern internet user. NordVPN's 5,500 superfast servers, located in 60 countries, will allow you to change your IP to avoid regional restrictions. Being geolocked or missing a premiere or a deal because you're in the wrong country is no fun. And with NordVPN, you'll be able to connect to get more content out of your streaming subscriptions. Also, it's important to keep our browsing info safe from the snoopy ISPs, and NordVPN will do just that. You can even use it in countries where VPNs are banned. NordVPN never logs your data and protects your information in public spaces by using double data encryption. It works on Windows, Linux, iOS, and Android, and has 24/7 customer support and a 30-day money-back guarantee. And most impressively, it's incredibly cheap, especially if you use our link. So what are you waiting for? Support us, get 4 months free of premium VPN, and save 73% by going to nordvpn.com/kingsandgenerals or clicking the link in the description. Don't forget to use the coupon code KingsandGenerals. Under its enterprising new king, the Vandal coalition abandoned hard-won lands in Baetica and sailed across to North Africa in 429. As they were doing so, their benefactor in Carthage, Boniface, managed to reconcile with his imperial rivals and regained imperial favour. He marshalled Roman forces to oppose the invaders. With a resupply fleet at their flank, the Vandal people, man, woman and child alike, gradually travelled east on the Roman road system towards Africa Proconsularis. On the way, they ravaged the cities such as Catena, Caesarea, Salde, and Sidiphus. Horrified bishops wrote to their leader, St. Augustine, pleading for advice. There might have been a sectarian aspect to this brutality, as later historians particularly emphasized the Arian Vandals' brutality towards Nicene Christians. The perpetrators of this violence would have been the 15,000 to 20,000 strong Vandal warrior contingent. Roman authorities attempted to broker a truce, but failed, and in early 430, Geiseric managed to crush Boniface's lower quality units in battle outside Hippo. Leaving no time for the Imperials to recover, the king ordered his army and the fleet to besiege the great city, cutting it off from the outside world. Geiseric besieged Hippo in this way for 14 months. After 3, a great blow to Roman morale was struck when Augustine died, but the city held on. After a year and 2 months had passed, the Vandals, themselves suffering the difficulties of maintaining a siege, abandoned their efforts and continued east, pillaging around Byzacena. Believing the barbarian invaders of Africa to be a threat to its interests, Constantinople sent a relief army to destroy the barbarians in 432. Though it was led by a prominent eastern general named Aspar, it too was defeated. This time, the beaten Romans didn't retreat to Hippo, leading to the Vandals taking and sacking it. Showing his diplomatic flair, Geiseric then negotiated a peace treaty with Valentinian III, in which he would send tribute to the Western Emperor each year in return for the official title of Dux. To bind the deal of 435, and to make it more palpable, the Vandal king also sent his son Huneric as a hostage. The Vandal king/Dux began attempting to consolidate his authority in the region almost immediately, aggressively persecuting Nicene bishops and trying to cement Arianism in Africa. In 437, and probably condoned by Geiseric, Vandal piracy fleets under a sort of admiral called Gunthorix began to sail into the Mediterranean, plundering many of its islands, particularly rich Sicily. There was no Roman response to this blatant barbarian prodding, and it was this weakness that probably led a daring Geiseric to believe he could take the final leap. In October 439, with the Roman Empire's armies fully tied up dealing with the Goths in Gaul, the Vandals marched on Carthage. The sources relate a stratagem or some kind of trick which Geiseric used to gain access to the city. Judging by the Vandal king's official dux status, it is possible he could have used such authority to gain access. When he did, the sources state that his army put the city to the sword. However, it is unlikely that Geiseric allowed his own men to ravage the city which was to become his capital. Instead, the Vandal leadership probably enacted a bloody purge on much of the Nicene Christian elite, those bishops who were writing the histories. Upon taking Carthage, Geiseric came into the possession of a treasure that was far more practically useful than mere treasure. He also captured the huge Roman fleet which was permanently docked there, vastly increasing Vandal naval might. With the momentum it now had, the Vandalic host sailed forth from Carthage in force. The vast seaborne strength which Vandal Carthage commanded at this point might have resembled the centuries-old tales the Romans had heard of the long-dead empire of Phoenicians which ruled North Africa more than half a millennium before. As the year 440 began, squadrons of these commandeered ships raided and plundered all the way from Sardinia to Rhodes. Geiseric himself led the main expedition to the Western Empire's secondary granary and strategic launching point of Sicily, many cities of which were taken and ravaged. His ultimate aim by doing this was to put pressure on the increasingly strained Roman Empire and force it to the negotiating table. These lightning attacks disrupted grain supplies to the Eternal City and snared vast quantities of treasure, but by the end of 440, Geiseric feared that a Roman counterattack was coming. To prepare for it, he sailed back to Carthage and ordered all of his fleets to join him there. This decision was a prudent one. Soon after the Vandal navy's return, a combined army and navy from both halves of the empire gathered in recently ravaged Sicily, set on retaking Africa. But this campaign would never leave the starting line. Eastern and Western commanders quarrelled and bickered about which of them would lead the armies, while political intrigue in Constantinople stymied reinforcement and supply, leading to terrible delays. Such constant postponement doomed the venture, if it had any prospects at all, because of other external pressures. Almost as soon as the imperial armies left their frontier posts for Sicily, the Huns took the opportunity in stride and raided the Balkans. The Sasanians, not willing to miss the chance to humble Constantinople's Eastern Empire, also took advantage and attacked Armenia. So, requiring their troops on other fronts and having accomplished nothing, the North African reconquest was abandoned. The bold but educated gamble to seize Carthage had paid dividends. Rome could simply no longer afford to direct military resources at Geiseric with other threats at their throat. In 442, the Vandalic leadership concluded a triumphant treaty with the Romans, of which Christian writer St. Prosper gives us this brief account. The Augustus Valentinian made peace with Geiseric, and Africa was divided between the two into distinct territories. With this agreement in hand, King Geiseric established a royal palace on the Carthaginian hill of Byrsa and set about ruling his wealthy new lands in a grounded and pragmatic, but still at times quite ruthless manner when necessary. With the freezing of hostilities with Rome, a 13-year-long Vandal peace began. Accepting the biased accounts of Nicene Christian authors such as Victor of Vita, there is actually little evidence that Geiseric and the Vandals uprooted or purged Roman farmers and taxpayers in order to settle their own people. In fact, the king seems to have understood that taking such an action would render his new lands unprofitable, and actually employed traditional Roman methods to govern Africa. Appropriating the empire's ancient honesta missio, or honorable mission custom of discharging veteran soldiers, Geiseric simply transferred the incomes from Roman soldiers to his Vandalic warriors in return for army service. Meanwhile, at the very top of the social pyramid, Geiseric and the high Vandal nobles replaced the emperor and the aristocratic estate holders. In this way, As Ian Hughes succinctly puts it, the Vandal nobles effectively stepped into the shoes of the Roman authorities that had previously ruled Africa. The remaining Roman population, which it should be remembered always significantly outnumbered the Vandals, simply paid their usual taxes to Geiseric rather than the Roman emperor. To cement the new regime's control over the administration, Geiseric appointed Germanic individuals to run certain key aspects of the kingdom, alongside retained Roman bureaucrats who the Vandals could trust. For instance, one high official who served as a governor of the king was a man named Heldica, a typically Germanic name. In addition, the equivalent of a Roman concilium was set up, a council comprising experts and magnates who would assist the king in running his realm. Much like the administration, this council was constructed in a mixed manner, in an attempt to integrate the remaining Roman power structure into the kingdom. The Vandals do not seem to have inflicted much damage on the rural, land-holding Roman aristocrats, but there is some tenuous evidence that many long-established magnates were deposed and replaced by trusted Romano-African families. Naturally, these newly minted individuals would be far more inclined towards loyalty to Geiseric, their benefactor. The king's other attempts to ensure his own and his family's legitimacy in the rule of Africa were many. Firstly, Geiseric adopted a new dating system for his kingdom, in which the year 439, the year of Carthage's seizure, was noted as the first of his reign. This would help instill legitimate Vandal rule in the popular imagination. Rather than a foreign king and barbarian occupier, Geiseric wished to portray himself as a fair ruler who held his new subjects in such high regard that he would base his reign on their great city. These attempts to firmly plant his family's position were assisted greatly by the prestigious betrothal of Geiseric's son, Huneric, to the daughter of Valentinian III as a condition of the 442 treaty. In addition to making the Vandal rule more palpable to the conservative Roman population of Africa, this marriage also helped the king change his people's infamous inheritance customs. The usual tradition was that the eldest male relative would inherit the throne through an election, but Huneric's elevation to such a prestigious position would place him in a good position to inherit the Vandal throne instead. Not content with merely turning the administration and structure of his new domain, Geiseric set about tapping the vast amounts of political capital which could be drawn from bringing religious institutions to his side. These reforms were primarily focused on increasing the prominence of the Vandals' chosen Arian branch of Christianity, while decreasing any influence which the empire's Nicene Creed still had. Though there was a pragmatic motive to this, there is also evidence to suggest that King Geiseric was actually quite a religious man at this point in his life. Before one of the Vandals' seaborne raids, the king was asked where the ships should go. His response was a concise one, imbued with a hint of cockiness, obviously against those with whom God is angry. To that end, churches that had formerly belonged to the Nicene clergy were instead handed over to Arian priests and bishops. Moreover, the Arian clergy also received a significant portion of the land which had been previously confiscated from the old Roman aristocracy, allowing them to function as a self-sufficient entity. This kind of reconfiguration also took place in the economy of North Africa under Geiseric's direction. A system that had previously focused on exporting goods, primarily grain, to Italy as part of the Annona tax system was freed from the imperial burden, allowing the region's merchants to trade a larger portion of their goods at the market. However, commerce with some regions of the Mediterranean was slightly reduced due to political factors. For example, diminished trade with the Eastern Empire may have been due to anti-Vandal sentiment or enforced imperial regulation designed to harm the Vandal economy. In southern Gaul, the decrease can be easily attributed to a bitter antagonism between Geiseric's Vandals and the Visigoths who ruled the area. On the other hand, trade with nearby Hispania blossomed with the dawn of barbarian Carthage. This is either evidence of mutual fondness between the Hispano-Romans and their former Vandal overlords, or that some of Geiseric's kin may have stayed behind in Spain when the king crossed the straits. Whatever the case, while some markets fell in profitability due to Geiseric's bellicose career, production markedly increased, a diverse range of exports continued flowing out, wealth flowed into Byrsa's coffers, and the monarchy introduced its own coinage. In foreign affairs, Vandal policy continued to be restrained and measured. No further attempt was made to assault the weakened Western Empire, due to the fear that any attempt to do so would provoke an attack from the more formidable East, and thereby harm the kingdom's stability. Moreover, there is some evidence of an internal conspiracy against the Hastingi ruling class by North Africa's great Vandal magnates, which disincentivized any further external attacks. When the plot was discovered, those responsible were brutally tortured and executed. Among the victims of Geiseric's purges were members of his own family, namely the wife and children of Gunderic, his half-brother and predecessor. The details are unknown, but he probably believed them to be likely future pretenders. Ian Hughes puts this underlying instability in brilliant terms, stating that, as with the Goths, the modern perception that the Vandals were a unified kingdom under the rule of Geiseric conceals the reality of many different nobles and groups being unhappy with the rule of one man. Nevertheless, the economy grew, sophisticated Roman legal practice resumed, and intellectual output once again flourished, all under the patronage and careful oversight of a barbarian monarch. Though the Vandalic military did not attack Rome during the peace, it does seem like they were still on the warpath. In 445, Geiseric undertook an assault on Litus Tyrannium, which was probably Turica in Spain, under Suebi control at the time. The first rupture in the so-called Vandal peace was Flavius Aetius's tenuous victory over the Huns in 451 at the Catalonian plains. It is likely that the triumph emboldened the Romans, and they rescinded any prospect of imperial marriage that Geiseric's son had with Eudokia. This didn't cause any immediate break with the empire, however. The spark for future war was to come from events outside the barbarian kingdom of Africa. Continuing the trend shown many times in both this and our last video on the subject, court intrigue and internal strife would once again prove to be the bane of Rome. In September 454, Magister Militum Aetius was assassinated by Valentinian III. Geiseric used the instability to prepare for hostilities, gathering his troops in Carthage. The preparations for war were timely indeed. Half a year after killing his top general, Rome's Emperor of 3 decades was himself assassinated and succeeded by Petronius Maximus. To secure the throne, Maximus forced Valentinian's widow Eudoxia to wed him instead, and also ordered that Huneric's betrothed marry his own son. The horrified and outraged empress looked all around her for assistance and saw her greatest diplomatic hope to the south, where her future son-in-law Geiseric was already fully prepared to take advantage of Roman chaos. If it ever actually arrived, the letter from Eudoxia to the Vandalic monarch was simply the last straw. Geiseric had already been hungrily eyeing the enfeebled Western Empire ever since Aetius's death, and this turmoil at the highest level simply confirmed the fact that Rome was vulnerable. So whether due to sheer opportunistic greed, anger at the murder of Valentinian III, fear of a potential future conflict, or any number of other potential reasons, Geiseric set sail from Carthage and headed straight for Rome at the head of a great fleet in 455. After a voyage lasting roughly a week, warriors of the formidable Vandal host disembarked from their vessels at Ostia in the mouth of Rome's Tiber River. Fear took hold of Maximus almost instantly, and he fled the city, being stoned to death as he did. Rudderless and without any legions to defend them, the desperate people of Rome again turned to the bishop of their city, Leo, who bravely agreed to meet Geiseric just as he had met Attila 3 years before. As in his previous encounter with the Hun warlord, the contents of Leo's conversation with Geiseric are not known. However, Prosper of Aquitaine tells us the church leader had such an effect on the Vandal king that, when everything was given into his hands, he was held back nevertheless from burning, killing and torture. An agreement was reached, and on June 2nd, citizens of arguably the most powerful city in the history of the world willingly opened their gates to a barbarian invader. Yet, anxieties that the Romans must have had about the rapacious Vandals were fortunately unfounded. Geiseric set himself up in the imperial palace, while his warriors began thoroughly plundering the occupied city. The Vandals sacked Rome for 14 days, compared to the 3-day ransacking by Alaric in 410. The treasury was emptied of its riches, temples were stripped of their valuable offerings, and the palace was picked completely clean. Even the treasures seized from Jerusalem after Titus's siege of the city were appropriated by the Vandals. After thorough looting, Geiseric left Rome on June 16th. He then loaded all of the captured wealth and captives he could onto the fleet and set sail for Africa. Among the spoils were former Empress Eudoxia and her daughters Placidia and Eudokia. Though the Vandal looting of 455 cleared Rome of its wealth, Geiseric does, to his credit, seem to have kept his promise to Bishop Leo. There is almost no evidence of mass killing, indicative of sackings throughout the ages. It is important to remember, however, that these atrocities probably took place in more isolated incidents away from the view of chroniclers. 13 years later, the Vandal Kingdom endured the final concerted effort by both halves of the empire to recapture Africa by defeating the Roman fleet at Cap Bon. This failure to regain Africa sealed the Western Empire's fate, and it was eventually dissolved by Odoacer in 476. In 477, Geiseric finally passed away after a reign almost half a century in length, longer than almost every other ruler of the age, and certainly longer than any other barbarian ruler. Unfortunately, after his death, the kingdom began a decline which would eventually result in the reconquest by Justinian and Belisarius 5 decades later. More videos on Germanic and Roman history are on the way, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.